At the edge of the Tibetan plateau, when the first rays of sunlight softly brush over the snow-capped peaks, everything seems to pause. Not for long. Just for a brief moment, enough to remind oneself, I'm still here. In the highlands where the air is thin, the mountains stretch endlessly, layer after layer like waves frozen in stone. Here life moves at a slower rhythm. People walk gently, breathe quietly, and live with a kind of patience that belongs only to places this vast. In this land there are those who choose to live differently. They don't seek noise. They don't compete. They don't stand on pedestals. They simply live, gently and naturally, like the wind brushing over the mountains or the clouds that drift freely across the sky. Lama Khenpo A-Chö was one of those people. He was born in 1918 in Chamdo, a small town nestled in the eastern part of Tibet. Back then, Chamdo was a quiet place. Crystal-clear streams wound through valleys. Ancient monasteries stood quietly on the slopes, blending into the mountains as if they had always been there. Colorful prayer flags fluttered in the wind, sending silent wishes into the sky. Children grew up chasing the cold morning air, their cheeks flushed pink from the mountain chill. It was a simple life, and for Lama A-Chö, it began just like that. His family wasn't rich, nor did they come from any noble lineage. They were ordinary people tending to their daily lives, wrapped in the calm rhythm of the mountains. But there was something about A-Chö that people noticed early on. While the other children laughed and played in the temple courtyard, young A-Chö often sat quietly by himself, gazing up at the sky. An elder monk once teased him gently, "What are you looking at up there, little one?" A-Chö smiled softly and answered, "I'm watching the clouds." "And why do you keep watching clouds?" "Because clouds don't try to hold on to anything." From a young age, A-Chö was sent to study at Chogar Gompa, a monastery of the Nyingma lineage, the oldest school of Tibetan Buddhism. He learned diligently, reciting scriptures, studying ancient texts, and listening carefully to the teachings of his masters. But for A-Chö, learning was not about accumulating knowledge. It was about learning how to live simply, how to let go. Years passed, and eventually he became a Khenpo, a title reserved for those who master Buddhist philosophy and guide others on the path of wisdom. Yet Lama A-Chö's way of teaching was different from others. He didn't climb onto grand stages. He didn't gather large crowds or organize elaborate teachings. He didn't travel far to spread his name. He preferred sitting quietly, perhaps over a cup of tea, talking softly to whoever happened to stop by. He once told his students, "The more you try to hold on, the heavier life becomes. When you let go, things become lighter." Among the teachings he shared, Dzogchen, the great perfection, was the heart of his practice. Dzogchen is not about striving to become better or trying to fix oneself. It teaches that the nature of the mind is already whole, already complete just as it is. One of the core practices of Dzogchen is called Trekcho, which means cutting through, not cutting through the world or renouncing life, but gently cutting through the illusions that keep us tangled up in ideas of self and separation, letting go of the need to improve or prove anything. Lama A-Chö lived his life exactly like that. His daily routine was simple. He woke early to prepare a small pot of butter tea, watched the sun rise from behind the mountains, chanted a few lines of scripture, then quietly walked around the monastery grounds, listening to the wind. There were no strict schedules, no busy calendars, no ambitions to become famous or revered. Just days flowing by gently, naturally, like his teachings in Dzogchen. Nothing to add, nothing to take away. In the later years of his life, Lama A-Chö quietly left the monastery and moved to the mountains. He didn't build a stone retreat. He didn't construct a hermitage with solid walls. He chose a small cave near Chamdo, where the morning light could filter in through cracks in the rocks, and the mountain breeze could pass freely. When his students came to visit, he smiled and said, "This place is good. When the wind passes by and the clouds drift across the sky, it's easier for the mind to loosen its grip." He didn't bring much with him. Just a simple robe, a small bowl, a few thin scriptures folded and worn, He didn't carry plans or expectations, only the wish to live each day completely, as it came, like a cloud crossing the sky, with no need to hold on. In Tibetan culture, people love the mountains, the rivers, and the quiet spaces in between. They understand the rhythm of nature and honor the pauses between each breath. To live simply is to live closely with the earth. For Lama A-Chö, moving to the mountains wasn't about escaping the world. It wasn't about withdrawing from life. It was simply the next step in his journey, just like how a cloud moves from one side of the sky to the other. He didn't tie himself to titles or positions. He didn't seek attention or applause. He just lived, naturally, gently. No clinging, no pushing away. If someone were to ask, what makes a life complete? Perhaps for Lama A-Chö, the answer was not in achievements or grand milestones, but in the quiet moments of being present. A warm cup of tea by a small fire, a morning spent watching the clouds drift by the cave's entrance, a smile shared with an old friend passing through, and the silent moments in between, breathing softly with the mountains. That was how he lived, and that was how he prepared for the days to come, days of stillness, days of quiet, in harmony with the vastness of the sky. What happened in those later days, when he finally paused everything completely, that is a story for another time. We'll continue that part of the journey in the next chapter. There is something about the mountains that teaches patience. Perhaps it's the way the snow gathers and melts, not by force, but by quiet surrender to time. Or the way rivers carve their paths, winding softly between stones, never rushing, never stopping. For Lama Khenpo A-Chö, the mountains were not a place to escape from the world. They were simply home, a place where thoughts had room to stretch, where the mind could settle, like dust returning gently to the ground after the wind has passed. After many years teaching at Chogar Gompa, Lama A-Chö quietly withdrew from monastery life. He had nothing left to prove. There were no grand ceremonies, no farewells. One morning, as the sun rose quietly over the horizon, he simply gathered his small belongings, a robe, a wooden bowl, a few worn scriptures, and walked up into the mountains. His students understood, or at least they tried to. In Tibet, when a teacher leaves for solitude, it isn't because they are turning away from life. It is because they are walking deeper into it. Lama A-Chö found a small cave near Chamdo. Nothing special, just a hollow in the rocks, large enough to sit, small enough to keep the wind gentle. From his cave he could see the distant snow lines shimmering under the morning light. The valley stretched far below, wrapped in mist like a soft blanket pulled over the earth. There were no walls, no doors to close, only the open sky and the steady rhythm of breath. Each day began the same way. He would wake before dawn, boil a small pot of tea, and sit quietly as the first light touched the peaks. Sometimes he chanted softly. Sometimes he said nothing at all. His practice continued, not as something separate from life, but woven into every moment. Dzogchen does not ask for special conditions. It does not require grand rituals or long pilgrimages. It only asks for simplicity, for presence, for letting things be as they are. Lama A-Chö lived that way. His meditation was not something he scheduled between other tasks. It was the space in which all tasks happened. Drinking tea was meditation. Sweeping the cave entrance was meditation. Watching the clouds move across the sky was meditation. He practiced trekcho, the cutting through, not cutting through life, but cutting through the tangle of thoughts that make life complicated. He once told a student, "The sky doesn't need to clean itself. It's clear by nature." So is the mind when we stop stirring it. Even in solitude, people still came to find him. Travelers from nearby villages, young monks from Chogar Gompa, occasionally an old friend who had shared practice with him decades before. They would climb the narrow path to his cave, bringing simple offerings, some barley flour, a bit of butter, a string of prayer flags. They didn't come looking for profound teachings. They came to sit quietly with him, to rest in the stillness that surrounded him like a gentle mist. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't. When he did, his words were soft, like a stone dropped into still water. One disciple once asked, "Rinpoche, how do I stop my mind from wandering?" Lama A-Chö smiled. "Let it wander," he said, "and notice who's watching." Years passed this way. Seasons shifted gently over the mountains. In summer, wildflowers bloomed along the cliffs, their petals fluttering in the wind like small, quiet prayers. In winter, snow covered everything in white silence, and the world became even more still. The cave became a part of his body. The mountain became a part of his breath. Nothing was missing. Nothing was needed. People sometimes asked if he was lonely. He would smile, eyes soft beneath weathered eyelids. How can you be lonely when you are never apart from anything? For Lama A-Chö, solitude was not separation. It was union. The sky, the earth, the sound of the river far below, everything was part of the same silence. Toward the end of his time in the cave, Lama A-Chö spent longer hours in meditation. But there was no announcement, no special ritual to mark this change. It happened naturally, like the way day becomes night. He began to speak less. His movements grew slower, more delicate, as if each gesture carried the whole of existence in it. His disciples noticed, but no one dared to interrupt the stillness. When someone asked if they should bring him more supplies, he gently declined. "Enough," he said. "The mountain provides everything." In Tibet, it is said that the greatest teachings are not always spoken aloud. Sometimes they are whispered by the wind. Sometimes they are found in the way a teacher lives, not in the words they leave behind. For Lama A-Chö, his final lessons were not given in formal lectures. They were given through presence, by simply being there, by letting life unfold without resistance. One early morning, as mist drifted softly through the valley, he sat in meditation, his body relaxed, his breath steady, his gaze resting lightly into the vastness before him. There was no need to name this moment, no need to explain. It was simply another morning in the mountains, another sip of tea, another cloud drifting by, another breath rising and falling like the wind. And so his final retreat began. Not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but quietly, naturally, just as a river returns to the sea or a cloud dissolves into the open sky. The story of what happened next, of the stillness that came after, that too is part of this journey. But it's a part we will continue in the next chapter. In the highlands of Tibet, stillness is not unusual. The wind rests, the sky pauses. Even the rivers seem to slow down in winter, their surfaces glazing over with quiet frost. For Lama Khenpo A-Chö, stillness was never just the absence of sound. It was a way of being, a way of gently stepping back from the noise of thoughts, the rush of time, the endless weaving of expectations. So when the time came for his final meditation, it did not arrive as a surprise. It came softly, like dusk slipping into night, unnoticed at first, until you realize the sky has changed color. One morning, just like countless mornings before, Lama A-Chö sat in his cave, his back straight, his breath gentle, his gaze open. Outside, the clouds moved lazily across the sky. The snow shimmered quietly on distant peaks. There was no ceremony, no announcement. He simply settled deeper into stillness. For hours, he remained like that. Then hours became days. His disciples, watching from a respectful distance, realized something had shifted. Yet his body stayed serene, his skin soft and radiant, his face calm as if he were resting in a quiet dream, eyes half open, lips curved in a faint, peaceful smile. They waited. In Tibetan tradition, this is not unusual. It is called thukdam, a deep state of meditation that sometimes occurs when a realized practitioner ceases ordinary life functions but remains resting in awareness. Thukdam is not a display. It is not magic. It is said to be a natural state of profound clarity, where the mind, unbound by worldly concerns, rests in its original nature. In those moments, there is no division between body, mind, and space. Everything becomes part of the same vast openness. Lama A-Chö had taught this for decades, and now he was showing it not through words but through presence. Days passed. His body did not show the usual signs of decay. There was no change in color, no stiffness. The warmth lingered in his chest area long after ordinary life signs would have faded. His posture remained perfect, natural, effortless. Local monks recorded the event. The Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center documented it. Even senior scholars from Chamdo noted the phenomenon with respectful silence. No one hurried to disturb him, because in Tibet, when a master rests in Thukdam, the greatest offering is patience. Outside the cave, the seasons continued their quiet work. The wind carried whispers through the valleys. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, casting soft patterns on the ground. Those who visited the mountains during those days said the air felt different. Some spoke of a gentle fragrance in the breeze, not the scent of flowers, but something subtler, like the memory of incense after it has burned away. Others whispered of rainbows appearing briefly over the ridge, arching across the sky without rain. A few said they saw his body become smaller, more compact, as if he were gently folding into the space around him. These are folk stories, oral traditions. No scientific records were made of these details. But in Tibetan culture, such accounts are not seen as proof or spectacle. They are simply shared quietly, like tales passed between friends over tea, with a knowing nod and a smile that says, "Some things cannot be measured." For those who witnessed Lama A-Chö in those days, there was no sense of tragedy, only a deep, gentle reverence. They didn't mourn, because there was nothing missing. The master was still there, present but silent, resting in the vast sky of his own awareness. It is said that the greatest teachers teach with their lives, and their silences often speak louder than their words. Lama A-Chö's final teaching was exactly this. Not a sermon, not a text, but a lived moment of complete surrender, free from struggle, free from holding on. The days stretched on. Disciples sat quietly near the cave, some chanting softly, some simply breathing with the rhythm of the wind. Time moved like the clouds, slow, unhurried, with no need to mark its passing. Eventually, the natural process would complete itself. But no one rushed to define when that happened. For the people of Chamdo, and for those who loved Lama A-Chö, this moment was not about endings. It was about stillness, about the gentle space between one breath and the next. In the mountains, when the wind grows still, everything listens. The stones listen, the rivers listen, even the sky seems to lean in quietly. That was how Lama Khenpo A-Chö chose to leave his final imprint, not as a monument, not as a name carved into history, but as a soft hush between moments. A reminder that there is beauty in pausing, that sometimes the deepest teaching is to stop, not because there is nothing more, but because nothing needs to be added. Everything is already complete, just as it is. What happened after? That too belongs to the story. But perhaps it's a part best left for the next chapter, where silence continues and the journey unfolds in its own way. In the high mountains of Chamdo, time moves differently. It is not marked by calendars or clocks. It is measured by the rhythm of the wind, by the shifting of shadows on stone, by the way clouds gather and drift apart. And so, after many days of silent vigil, Lama Khenpo A-Chö's disciples noticed a change. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply natural. The warmth that had lingered in his chest, the subtle radiance of his skin, the breathless stillness he had rested in for days, these signs gently faded. The state of Thukdam had run its course. In Tibetan tradition, When a great practitioner rests in Thukdam, the community watches with patience and respect. There is no rush to interfere, no need to impose conclusions. Life, after all, has its own rhythm. It knows how to complete its own cycles. And so, when it became clear that Lama A-Chö's meditation had reached its final stillness, his disciples quietly gathered near the cave. They did not cry out. They did not wail or weep. They sat together softly chanting, letting the sounds rise and fall with the breeze. There was no need for loud farewells, no grand ceremonies, no monuments to build, because Lama A-Chö had already given them the most important teaching: how to live simply, how to let go gently, how to leave no trace except for kindness. In accordance with his wishes, there was no public display of his remains. The disciples followed his instructions closely. There was no shrine erected, no grand relic tour, no attempt to turn his life into a spectacle. His body, still serene, was cared for with tenderness. According to local accounts, it was respectfully concealed in a remote, undisclosed location somewhere in the mountains he loved. No one outside his close circle knows exactly where, and that is how he wanted it. In a time when many seek recognition, Lama A-Chö chose anonymity. In a world where people chase after legacy, he chose impermanence. He taught not by building temples or writing volumes of philosophy, but by showing how to live lightly, like clouds that pass without leaving a mark in the sky. His disciples understood this, and so they carried out his final wishes quietly, without fanfare, without making a pilgrimage site out of his resting place. They let his story dissolve into the wind, like incense smoke fading into the air. Yet stories, like seeds, find their own way to grow. Even without public displays, even without stone markers, Lama A-Chö's life continues to ripple through time. Monks in distant monasteries still speak of him in hushed, respectful tones. Travelers pass along the story about the teacher who lived like the wind and left like a cloud. Some tell of the cave near Chamdo, where a gentle master once sat watching the sky. Others whisper about the day the mountain grew quieter, as if the earth itself paused to breathe with him. But beyond the stories, beyond the legends, there is something subtler. It is the feeling left behind, a sense of peace woven into the fabric of the land, a kind of silent teaching that lingers not in words but in presence. The lesson is simple but not easy, that everything changes, that holding on too tightly only makes life heavier, that sometimes the deepest wisdom is knowing when to loosen the grip, when to let life flow as it will. Lama A-Chö's entire journey was an invitation to remember this. Even now, years later, when the wind brushes gently through the mountains of Chamdo, some say you can still feel his presence, not as a ghost, not as a relic, but as a reminder that peace is not something to be found far away. It is right here in this breath, in this moment of quiet, in the pause between one thought and the next. The mountains remain. The rivers continue their soft journey through the valleys. The clouds drift by just as they always have. And somewhere in that gentle rhythm, the legacy of Lama Khenpo A-Chö lives on. Not in statues, not in monuments, but in the art of living simply and the grace of letting go. So perhaps, when you next find yourself sitting quietly, whether by a window in a quiet room or walking along a quiet path, you might remember his story. And in that small pause, in that soft breath, you may find a piece of what he left behind. A gentle echo of stillness, a simple reminder that nothing needs to be added, and nothing needs to be held too tightly. Everything is already complete, just as it is.